say that?
No.
And he got a degree in a very famous university there.
Sorbonne.
Right.
Who knew?
Yeah, that was very
Somebody
important.
write that.
All the people that are living there because you give them jobs and you know the economy. A black family and the last name is Gaston. And one of our ancestors was a captain in the Spanish Navy. And when they liberate a slave, they would give him their last name. So, it's not 100% sure, but
having children while they were when my father was at the University of Dolores. And then when my father graduated from Villarova, and then my other grandfather had another sugar mill where I was born. Then my grandfather asked me to please come and now take care of his sugar mill. So Papi was in Dolores for many years, managing the Gaston business.
Yes, so her father was named Manolo Suarez. Yeah, no, we are. Before. Yeah, so before they became the administrators, it was her father. Yeah. Manolo, and that's.
So what year? Bueno, she was part of that era.
What year did Abuelo become administrator?
She went back to university and got a degree in petrochemical, so she could work in a sugar mill. Not just like the products grandmother, but she was in charge of the chemistry, the sugar chemistry where they were at the process that all the stuff turning into sugar.
no,
What year was that? But early on, that women were allowed to go to the University of Havana, and she graduated with a chemical degree, chemistry, sugar chemistry, and then went to work on the Ingenio, in the Ingenio sugar process.
Who was that?
During the harvest time.
One very sad fact is that my mother's mother died when my mom was 13.
You're all of them to the family. There's not enough for everybody, of course, so there's a raffle over there that's going to be done at the Mass. So not all of you want Cuban people. 59, of course. Cuban people got kicked out of Cuba.
We were called Gusanos.
We were called Gusanos. There we go. And at the same time, there was the civil rights movement going on in the United States. Vietnam War.
Right in the banks of New York. And it was in the time of the revolution, right? They actually went to New York, pulled money from New York, and took it down to Cuba. And then lost a whole bunch. Is that true or not true? I was just kind of curious if anybody knew that information.
I have heard it, yes.
You have heard it, yes?
Yeah, absolutely. But
Okay.
I think they only brought back part of the money. They only brought back part of the money, gave it to Fidel. But they kept some here in the back of New York. You heard that too?
That they had some, but not all, of course.
Right. So when we landed in Miami, we were able to get some of it to pay, the rent of the first month and so forth. I think this guy knows a lot of the lawyers.
I was in a reunion de todos los tíos y las tías, talking about the money that the las tías had in New York. They brought back to Cuba $1 million, and they left $100,000 in New York. And that was the $100,000 that was divided among all the tíos and tías when we came to the United States. That's why it was so little. It was around $10,000 or more or less per family. They kicked me out, my father out of the meeting because he was totally opposed of them taking the money to Cuba. Pero Toto refused to listen. She didn't listen to anybody, and unfortunately, that's what happened.
Right? So this $100,000 was just to be a stopgap for a number of years, right? 4, 5, 6, 7 years max. Not 60 years, but I don't know how many years now.
Other questions?
Maria de Los Angeles. That's her name.
Maria de Los Angeles. Angelita, right? Did they call her Angelita?
Yeah.
But she died young also. So, Tia Lili.
It says it up there.
And there's 10 of us. So, our parents sent us out, 4 of us. Our parents sent 4 of us out to Madrid to the grandparents' house, hoping to come out later, but we stayed there. And then my parents and the rest of the kids came out. Not the rest, most of the kids came out. And stayed in Madrid for a very short time, a year and a half. And that's where the youngest was born, which really drove my grandparents crazy. And the people that helped us get to, that helped my father settle in his hospital, got together, rented a house for all of us. And the house, they put furniture in there, and they put sheets there, and they put cooking pots, and they put rugs in there. It was wonderful. And I remember, anyway, so it was cool.
What year was that?
Terrible years. I was 15 when I arrived to, so.
I graduated in the summer of '60, in June, and I wanted to go to the Scambray Mountains to fight in the rebellion against Fidel Castro and all that. So my father got me to the American Embassy and put me on a plane to Detroit. And what was in Detroit was 2 things. One, the distance from Miami, so I never found out about the invasion. And 2, a Jesuit college that I didn't have to pay for because the Jesuits took care of it. So that was the reason why I ended up in Detroit.
What was the first reason?
The first reason was because my father did not want me to find out about the invasion.
Because he was going to sign up.
He wanted to go fight in the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Right. And before that, I wanted to go into the Scambray Mountains with a group of guys. And my father,
Tell him what happened when you arrived at the University of Detroit.
What happened is that when I got out the taxi with the bags, I looked for the stairs of the university because the University of Havana has huge stairs going up. And when I couldn't find the stairs, I sat down on the bench and started crying. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. And this lady came by and said, "What's wrong with you? What can I do for you?" I said, "Where are the stairs? Where are the stairs?" And she says, "There are many stairs in here." Well, there were little stairs. I'm looking for the big stairs. No big stairs in here.
In Detroit.
Too much ice.
Yeah. From the Educación Católica who called over to the college and got me in without having to pay a room and board and school completely paid.
Detroit. And then your whole family went to Detroit.
Yes, I took them to Detroit because they couldn't make any money over here. So I left the college for about 1 year and I made some money working and I was able to move them over to Detroit.
Wow.
And when they got established and my father had a job and all that, I went back to school and finished.
So we've heard about Garcioteros, the number 6. This was Barcia's number 2. And the Batistas, how did you end up in Eugene, Oregon?
And he had been an assistant to a professor who was a French guy, Catholic, was very famous. But anyway, because he was a professor at Princeton, he made a lot of friends, and then when we came to Cuba, he started to look for a job, and they offered him a job. The person who was running the architecture department at the University of Oregon was one of his former students. So offered him a visiting professor position for 2 years. He was already retirement age at that time. He had to retire at age 60 or something like that. But they allowed him to continue teaching for a couple more years. So that's where he ended up in Eugene, Oregon, where I met my husband. And so we stayed in Oregon for 6 years.
And then Manolo Suarez and
But as I understood it, Catholic University was accepting professors from Villanova to teach there, and even invented some conferences to get people out, like Acosta, Professor Acosta came on a false pretense of attending a conference. But he worked there, he worked in the nuclear science department under Dr. Clyde Cowan, who then sort of adopted our family, and I went to live with them for the first year when we were here. Yeah, they were like my American family.
and how about
When we left Cuba, we went to Miami, and we stayed there about 6 months, and then we moved to Puerto Rico because, well, my father's a civil engineer, and there was a lot of work in Puerto Rico. So he moved to Puerto Rico in, I think it was 61, and then the family moved back to Miami in 1974, and I stayed. A bunch of Cuban engineers went there and built it. And then that telescope is a radio telescope, and it worked until a couple of years ago because the concrete bowl started cracking.
But he studied in the University of the United States, and the university is the one that referred him to the telescope. So the university can get the job. I just don't remember the name of the university.
and the one that is my family, just to our family, the Christian Brothers, high school chemistry and physics. He was also a civil engineer like Carlos and like the father before them. And he always thought that there was going to be an explosion in the lab and he would get fired. So he said, I better get a real engineering job. And he passed his resume around, and somebody in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, there were Cuban doctors there that found him a job at Alice Chalmers, a agricultural equipment company. So we all moved to Milwaukee when I was 6. And it was only the 3 of us, not all of us, because Annie and Maria were nuns, and Christy married Juani. So Christy, only one sister married a Cuban, and they always stayed. And then they stayed in Milwaukee until I graduated from college. I'm the youngest, in 1979. And they were so glad that I got out of the house so they could leave Milwaukee. Where'd they go? They went back to Fort Lauderdale to be close to Christy.
Okay, so I might have, when we first came from Cuba, Dad tried to get a job working in a sugar mill. And they told him that he had too much experience and that he couldn't work there.
In the U.S.
In the U.S., yeah, so he couldn't get a job.
Because he was offered jobs in Mexico, but he didn't want us to all have to go to boarding schools. It was in rural Mexico.
Are you 2 sisters?
Yes. I'm the youngest, I'm 6, she's 4.
Thank you.
I'm numero 4.
We know the name, but we don't know the faces.
Yes, okay. But then, so he couldn't get a job, so he worked at Army Navy, lifting boxes and putting things in storage at night.
Our sister made more money than he did at the Army and Navy. Maria was the teller or the
And he was lifting boxes, which he was back. And then he got the job at the high school. That was the next thing. So that made him happier.
And our sisters liked that it was all boys, and that he would bring boys over for tutoring to the house. And my mom liked it too. She liked chaperoning the dances.
15 minutes.
Yeah. Us in our last few minutes and reflect on what we have done together. The reason I asked those questions of how did everybody leave, that was something Graciela really suggested that we do. That we hear how we all left. Please, share that.
Okay, this representation of a bag of the sugar. It says Central Dolores, Zafra, 1959, Matanzas.
And it was 100,000 bags?
It was 100,000 bags.
100,000 bags.
And I understand that the bags were like 200 pounds, but I may be wrong.
And this was an innovation of the family to use burlap
Yeah.
instead of boxes.
So, you know, they sell this in a Miami store.
Really? They sell it in a Miami store, he said. Azúcar Central, Dolores, Eugenio Batista.
Yeah. And my grandfather, Manuel Suarez, was also in prison, and when they arrested him, they came to his house to arrest him. And just to make the point, we're serious, they arrested 3 daughters because they were daughters of him. So my mother, Eloisa, and Tia Lala, and Tia Teresa, the 3 of them were arrested. My mother was 17 years old, and I think it was about 37 days that she was a political prisoner. My grandfather was like 3 months. And then as soon as they got out, they just left Cuba as fast as they could.
They us to prison, but there were 2 men that were there visiting my father, and they were taken to prison too. So they didn't have any real cause. They just wanted to put people in prison and scare them. So they are arrested like 100,000 people in one day. Didn't have where to put them, so they put him. There was a fortress at the entrance of Havana, and they put 3,000 soldiers, and there they put 6,000 prisoners. So it's very important to point that out. You know, it's not something that we did, is that they put people in prison to scare them.
Tell them when you got shot.
And that wasn't on our.
And I want to say, and I'm the emotional one of our family, so my nieces and nephews over here used to seeing me cry. But just that, and I've said it often, but thank you to all of you, the older generations, for enduring the trauma, enduring the trials, for persevering, so that we might be here to enjoy the life that we all have. And honestly, not a day goes by that I don't thank God for the strength that you all have and that you continue to have. Because honestly, you could be angry and resentful every day and you would be justified. But you aren't. And so we get to live in happiness and in love because you all have decided to live happily. So thank you. I can't thank you enough.
And you can talk among yourselves about what are the connections that you see between what was happening in the world, what was happening in the church, what was happening in Cuba, and our own family story. We're not going to talk about that now, but you can ask those questions, talk about it more. But right now, I just want to ask you, for you, what was a highlight of creating this wall together? Let's just go around and just hear different voices. What was the highlight of creating this wall together? Casey. Okay, we'll come back. Peter.
I like the fact about the 60,000 Arabs in Cuba. Didn't know that. 60,000 Arabs in Cuba? That was an interesting fact I didn't know before.
Good. Some interesting facts. Mary, for you.
The fact that if it wasn't for Castro, I wouldn't have met this man and had 12 kids.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's very interesting, all the history that you've compiled from centuries ago, and the roots of the family going back a lot further than I was ever aware of. So I find that very interesting.
Thank you. Carmen.
Well, my first thought was when I was looking at the sugarcane stack, I was like, that's probably why we all inherently have a sweet tooth. The theme of sugar.
Everybody is interested right now of ordering pizza.
The day they took the mill away, because I had a chance to interview your dad about that when I was in graduate school at FIU. And yeah, that was just such a pivotal moment in the family's history, you know, to have these Milicianos show up and say, you're going to sign this deed over to the revolution. And he called the lawyer, and the lawyer says, you're doing it under duress, so it means nothing. Under international law, it means nothing. So do it, because I don't want to see you get killed, which is what it was done. So I'm glad he signed the papers, because again, it means nothing that the mill is still technically your family's. Now the sad thing, and I was telling Bill, is I've been to the mill many times, as have many others, and there's no mill. But that family, Esperanza, still loves the Gastones and asks about all of you all the time. And we, you know, keep her abreast of how the family's doing. But her husband, I think, was the administrator under your dad. And of course, they stayed behind, as did a lot of people. So, to Christina's point, I also want to recognize the folks who didn't get to leave, who are still there suffering under an oppressive regime, and that we not forget them, and that we continue to fight for their freedom. I think it's really important that we continue to do that, and that we continue to engage with the Cuban people, because unfortunately, the Cuban Revolution and the U.S. reaction to it has made us think that we're enemies, and we're not. We are not enemies with the Cuban people. So the degree to which we can continue to engage with the Cuban people is how we're going to achieve freedom in Cuba. That's my personal opinion.
What has impressed me the most is how a young crowd has listened and stayed, and we're not distracted by their phones or by anything else. They sat here and they listened, and they're learning, and it's very impressive.
With that, I'll say my big appreciation and reflection on this is holding space for this conversation. I've been coming to this since I was a little girl, and it's a beautiful thing to keep hearing the stories over and over again. And it's a lot of work to create this, and so I'm grateful and thankful for the space to be able to sit and hear these stories and be able to tell my children as they get older. So I think it's a beautiful thing, and I'm very grateful for it. And I'm going to pass it to my abuela, who's going to greet me after I say this. What you have to say at the table. She said that she loves me so much, and she wants everyone to know. And I'm her favorite granddaughter. And with that, I'm going to pass it on.
Okay, I wanted to that we have a responsibility with the children and the people that live there. And maybe this generation, but the next, things are going to change in Cuba at some point. So keep in mind that the main point is to be generous with the people of the ingenieros. And so I just want to put that little frame in the minds of the younger generation, so that never forget that there are many souls there that are going to need help in the future. The other thing I want to say is that this was really boring in the beginning. So, but it turned out nice.
No es mi idea. It's a model, you know, in the technology of participation. I'll tell you more if you want to.
I'm the oldest of Rosie and Aurelio's 17 grandchildren. And as I look at this wall, you said responsibility. That's the first word I thought of. And the reason I see responsibility here is because as these reunions continue, the the responsibility of sharing this story that we have is going to be shifted one generation down. It's going to keep, that shift's going to continue as we move on. And so as me and my cousins kind of migrate into adulthood, that responsibility is going to be shifted on us to continue telling the story and keep it alive. And so I echo Yahiki's sentiment of gratitude towards the work that previous generations have done. And as I sit here this fun, absorbing everything I can, it's going to be up to us to continue it.
Yes. Tias, all the primos, always together. What that was like to be spread all over the world, divided. I mean, just hearing that they ended up in Eugene, Oregon, and Detroit, and Milwaukee, and Spain, and Puerto Rico, at a time when there were no cell phones, no emails, you know, people scattered to the winds, and then just trying to survive and find out where anyone was. And I just really want to call into the room and honor Tia Graciela, who in 1980, I remember my mother telling me, after 20 years, Tia Graciela said, it's time to find everyone and come back together. She's like, it's been 20 years of survival, of everyone just trying to make it. And she had that wisdom and that foresight to hold that very first family reunion in 1980. I was 15 at that time, dating myself, and I just remember like, oh, what is this? It was fascinating. You know, we came down and then just all of a sudden reconnect all the puzzle pieces, right? And just continue to learn and love and cherish the family stories, as you're saying, but how all of us carry that legacy forward. So grateful to Tia Graciela, who organized that first reunion. Grateful to Graciela, her daughter, who has continued. Yeah. Because it was all falling apart. And grateful now to the next generation, Yvette's leadership. Yvette Batista. Who also, you know, just as and then everyone else who supported Yvette. And to your point, Joseph, like each generation. So just want to call that into the room, and so glad we continue to come together.
This all together. We are all different learners, and this visual representation has been awesome. And even the color coordination, like this took a lot of time and effort to create this. And I want to thank all of us for coming together to hear these little snippets and stories. I was 2 at the first one, and I haven't missed one. But while I was younger, I wanted to play spoons with my cousins, and I'm thinking of those that are not here today, that are watching over us in heaven, and those that couldn't make it. But as I get older, I'm so, like, I want to hear this, and I want to hear from you guys of these stories, and I wish I could, like, you know, have a recording, well, you are recording, but like create it into a book or something, or even make this beautiful, you know, thing. But I appreciate all the effort and work that it's in.
About what prompted me to keep everybody together, what prompted me to go ahead and keep doing these family reunions. And I'll tell you a little bit of the story. And now we have to close down, and tomorrow we'll continue having fun. Please, please.
And it was really a challenge for everyone, because my father, being the brain that he was, he decided that we all had to train to run in the store. So for weeks we went there at night and we ran, and we had the manager move food from far away to the front and so forth, so that it would take less time to bring it to the cashier. Anyway, in 15 minutes, I believe we raised over $11,000, and of course it was all a feat of engineering on my father's part, because even my poor mother would be running with a box of caviar. So anyway, it was really fun.
And the film exists.
Oh, really? Yeah,
We're gonna watch it tomorrow, actually, at the store.